Hi, everyone. Welcome to the GoldFish Report. I'm your host, Louisa. Today is Friday, April 20th, 2018, and this is our weekly Country Roads with Winston Shrout. And of course, we have Winston with us. Welcome, Winston. How are you today for Friday?
Well, not doing too bad. We've had a few clear skies here in the area, and I looked up. I keep looking up all the time. I haven't seen any chemtrails lately. Have you?
Have I? I haven't seen any sky lately.
Oh,
I think it's only chemtrails up there. I don't know what's going on the East Coast, but we've really, someone said today they called this sprinter because there's
yeah,
spring. It's really kind of there's signs of spring, but it's still very cold. It's still, it's only 40 today so far, and it'll probably get down to 30s tonight again. It's just crazy cold.
yeah. Well, we'll deal with it.
Yeah, we're getting there. I mean, hopefully, it's promising that at least there's signs of spring, so that's good.
Yeah, there you
So, what we're going to talk about today, we're just having some internet issues today. We aside from our YouTube channel being deleted and a whole bunch of other things, we have a different internet that we're using now, and it's not so good. There's not enough to keep it going, so it's really helpful that our viewers, that this is a viewer-supported report, and we do appreciate all of our viewers who do contribute because it's absolutely necessary to keep the internet going. So we do
yeah.
appreciate that. Today we're going to be talking about, Winston wants to talk today about Madoc, a Welshman who in 1170 landed here in America, and how it relates. So there's a historical impact to the story about how it relates to our present situation. So in all due respect, I will hand it over to Winston to tell us the story.
Well, the reason I'm bringing this up again, we had talked a couple of times ago about this gathering of Native people at Walker Lake, Nevada in 1890, and it was attended by a Cheyenne named Porcupine. And he had talked about all the different peoples that had come to this thing, and he talked about some white Indians that he couldn't account for. And so, that kind of stimulates your interest a little bit. And I had speculated that they had come from Yucatan. Now, that may be the case, or it may be the case as we go along here. You'll see some other parallels. And so I wanted to trace that history back. For one thing, this story of Madoc is the basis for the claims of the English over the Spanish in regards to who discovered America. And so the Spanish, of course, go back to Christopher Columbus, but then, which was, 1492, but all of a sudden this Madoc character from Wales pops up in 1170 and had actually literally spread all over North America. And then as we go along, actually he made two voyages, as will be pointed out. The first voyage came and landed in what we call Mobile Bay, Alabama. He went back and brought another group, and they ended up in Yucatan. And those people are still there, as I had mentioned. One of my friends, actually, I think probably back in the late 70s, maybe the early 80s, he took his Harley, and made a tour down there, and actually had a chance to visit with them. Now he at that point didn't know about history and stuff, and so, but he did have a chance to visit with these what's called white Indians. He said they were fair skinned, had lighter blonde hair, blue eyes, the whole business. And so, and they do figure in to future events. And maybe I'll get into some of that. But it's interesting, I told the story about that one fellow I met from up on the Ute Reservation, Northern Paiutes up there, who had told me that he had eyes on, that he saw the golden jewels, that were prepared to adorn the temple at the New Jerusalem. But what I didn't tell you was he had red hair and freckles. He claimed to be a Cherokee. I don't. Yeah, I don't. Anyway, if
Sure
we
he
go
wasn't
through,
a Viking?
well, as we go through this story, you're going to see a lot of interesting things that the people had simply not considered because it's,
Okay.
for whatever reason, among the native people, histories and all those kind of things, this has been completely squelched lately, even though it caused a great deal of interest to the early English colonists. Even Thomas Jefferson sent out a party to go and locate these people, and they turned up from time to time. So anyway, it has to do with history. It has to do with uh, who discovered America and all that kind of stuff, and who has the land rights, and all that typical European BS. So anyway, I thought today that we would go over some of that history so that people would, maybe be exposed to something new. Maybe be exposed to something new that might figure into their thought process when they start to think about, uh, things here in North America. So anyway,
Very good.
yeah.
Winston, all right.
Excuse me.
Ready.
Yeah. So we're back on.
Yep, we're on.
Okay. All right. I wanted to show you the source of this particular information that I have today. It's part of a book that was written by a fellow. His name is Cary Ross Boren or Old Boren. He's an interesting fellow that I started communicating with when he was in prison. He had been put in prison by the LDS authorities because they couldn't control him. He's an interesting fellow, and I'll show you some of his credibility here in a moment. But I had started corresponding with him when he was in prison, and he said, he said the only thing that kept me alive, he said, I know where all the skeletons are buried.
Ooh. What
And
was
so that's the only thing that kept him alive. And he actually wrote this book while he was in prison to basically save his life, because otherwise they'd have kept him in prison forever. But anyway, he managed to get out. And so then after he came out, then I had a chance to, sit down with him, face to face, which was an interesting interview. But in any event, he has quite a history because he's a natural descendant of Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet, and also of Isaac Morley. I mean, I could go into that history for, I could talk for 2 hours just on that history alone, but I won't. I want to get into this story about Madoc, but the information about Madoc is in this book. And so here you can get this, you can find it online and get this book. But anyway, it's called The Widow's Son, The Esoteric History of the Prophet Joseph Smith and the Origin of Mormonism. Now, when I had a chance to sit down and talk to Cary about this, he told me, he said, first off, he said, I am Gnostic, much like the Cathars were. And so he only deals with facts. And he's careful not to draw too often many conclusions. He'll allude to certain facts, which might lead you in a certain direction, some of which I disagree with, by the way. But in any event, in his book, which he wrote while he was in prison, so here's this copy of it. Now, the contents of it are absolutely astounding. This guy, first off, when he was actually functioning with the corporate church, he had worked in the church historian's office. And, for those who have been associated with the LDS church, you know what that is. And also he was a major factor in the genealogical society. But anyway, this book here, you can see the contents of it. I mean, first off, he is so detailed that in many instances he'll kind of, lull you into la la land with all the details and everything.
A lot of very interesting, especially look at the topics, though. These are fascinating.
I'm trying to tell you. Yeah. In book 2, he's got the Rosicrucians, Knights Templars, Priory Design, the Merovingians,
Marriage of Jesus.
It goes on.
Better get ready for that.
It goes on and on. Book 3, the Bonaparte Connection.
Oh
And
my
there
goodness.
was a huge connection with Bonaparte.
Wow.
And then uh, look for Mozart connection, Marie Antoinette. Anyway, and then it gets down into Madoc, which is the part I want to go into. But you'll notice there at book 5 on chapter 46, he goes into Saint Germain. He has a great deal of information about Saint Germain, his interaction.
Mm.
And after reading this book, that's why I always tease Germain about being the French dandy.
Yeah.
And he don't get mad about it. He just thinks it's funny too.
That's funny.
Cause he was all the time wearing all those diamonds and jewels and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
For a hillbilly, that I don't think I could ever handle that. But anyway, in this
Too
book,
much
he has,
too much
yeah,
bling. Too much bling for you, Winston.
I guess. Anyway, you get down to book 6, though, and this is the part that I wanted to uh, bring up today. Now,
Mm-hmm.
what I've done, I've copied some of this. You can see it's kind of small print if
Mm-hmm.
you get down into it. So I've copied the portions I want to refer to in larger print, so that we can take a closer look at that. But if you do some research on old Boren, I think he goes by Boren, but actually he has a claim to the Irish throne.
Hmm.
And when he did all the genealogy and registered with the Irish registry as a prince of Ireland, he got contacted by Bernadette Devlin because she wanted to enlist him for the the IRA and stuff, which he declined. He didn't want to get
Right.
involved in the IRA and stuff.
No.
But Bernadette called him on the phone, wanted to talk to him about it.
That's really funny.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, aside from all that, and also, when you remember Alex Haley in that book called Roots,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So Carrie, he had assisted Haley in,
Did he?
in doing the research, for that book.
Is that right? Hmm.
So he has credentials.
Okay.
Carrie has credentials, and also when you go on the internet, you might find some of his other books. He used to run a website called, I think it's something about Western Outlaws and all that kind of. So he's got the stories about Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and all them others. And he has some interesting books that you can find. But this is just one of them, and he wrote this in 1997 while he was still in prison. Probably the thing that sprung him, because they intended to keep him there the
And
rest of
where
his life.
is he still?
Huh?
Where is he today?
I kind of lost contact with him. We did have a lot of things in common
Mm.
because I grew up, in Kentucky, and there's, from where I was living there, about 2 or 3 miles on a different road, there was a place called Bryan's Station Springs. Some of the first settlers that came into Kentucky established a small area there, the fortification around the spring, and some of those were his ancestors. So when he was in the joint, I just happened to be back in Kentucky and went down, took some pictures of Bryan Station Springs and everything, and sent them to him. So we established a certain rapport,
Yeah.
and he would tell me things that he wouldn't tell other people because of that rapport.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was reading his book and I come to some questions and stuff, I'd write to him and he'd tell me, things that weren't in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got a little bit of extra help
Footnotes.
there with some of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
Very nice.
yeah. I mean, like I say, I've run into some interesting people across the time.
Yes, Winston. We see very interesting. Where can people now these books you said there was like book 4, 3, 4, 5, 6. There was many
It's
books
all
there.
in the same. It's all in the same book.
Oh, I see. I see. So it's the same book and they can our viewers can get it online if they Google it.
Yeah.
Okay. So it'd
Here
be
back, you can go.
so it's like chapter 1 or whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
Just
Here's his name, Kerry Ross O'Boren, and you can just research that on the internet, or you can just type in, this name of this book, The Widow's Son, The Esoteric History of. Oh, very crazy computer. The Esoteric History of the Prophet Joseph Smith and the Origins of Mormonism. and so you can go and find that. If you, like I say, you know, I gave him. I had a hardback copy of it first, and I gave it to a friend of mine. I said, now you're going to. I said, if I give you this book, I said, you got to promise me that you won't spend all your time reading it, because I knew he would. Anyway, so I talked to him, I don't know, probably a couple of weeks after that. Well, so I asked him, I said, how far have you gotten in that book? He said, I've spent the last 2 weeks on the first 7 pages.
Oh my God.
That's how involved you can get in this information.
I'm sure. I'm sure, Winston.
Yeah. Like I
Wow.
say, here in the forward, he talks about
Whoa.
some of his experiences and stuff, and his genealogy, and talking about, you know, Bernadette Devlin. Here.
Yeah, I see. I see it. Yeah.
So anyway, it's quite interesting, you know,
Mhm.
just his history. He starts talking about, you know, some of this other. Here, you know, here he brings in the Robert Flood. You remember Robert Flood we talked about?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, the guy who was responsible in some measure of the translation of the King James Version.
Right.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of information in this book right here.
Mm.
Sometimes there's too much information, because you have to work your way through all the genealogies and everything. Because, you know, like, he's a genealogist, and so
Oh, okay.
he has names, he has dates, he has
Right.
connections.
Wow.
That's why I guess this fellow, you know, spent
Mm.
2 weeks
Right.
studying the first 7 pages.
Exactly. Well, you have to put flowcharts and get trees going, and you got to connect the dots the best you can. I can see it. It's very compact. It's like very, very compact. There's a very densely um, organized the information. So I find it
Yeah.
sometimes, yeah, it's challenging to follow all that stuff.
Okay, so what we want to do today, in particular, in this book, he has several chapters on this Madoc character that probably most people have never heard of,
Mhm.
but who figures in largely to the European claims and so forth in North America. Now, like I say, I started out talking about Porcupine, talking about these white natives that attended the Walker Lake situation. And I had indicated they probably came from Yucatan, because when Madoc first came in 1170 AD, he first apparently landed in Mobile Bay, Alabama. But the second trip he made, they landed in Yucatan.
Hmm.
So uh, anyway, the story gets pretty interesting. So that's what I want to do today, is to go over some of this. You know, like I say, it's history, but you're not going to find it in the high schools. You're not going to find it in college. I mean, I went to all that stuff.
Right.
I never heard of this Madoc until I got
Nope.
this book from Carrie.
Right.
So it's just interesting for people to, you know, have this information. So anyway, what I've done
Mhm.
is I've kind of blown it up a little bit for easier reading.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, I'll just start it out here. I have some, you know, particular points. Like I say, he gets very laborious with all his genealogies and everything,
Mm.
and explanations. God, he very precise, very
Right.
precise. You know, and bringing all these names and dates and connections and all these kind of things. But you know, for the sake of, you know, time, I mean, we could probably spend a month on this book.
Yeah.
20. It's
Yeah, it looks
it's
looks
just
like
that interesting.
ooh, daughter of the American Revolution. You know, I'm a Dar.
Hmm.
I sure am.
Well, my children could be, but I've chosen not to go that route. I mean, I don't get on Facebook, so you can imagine.
Hmm. Well, it's interesting because to qualify, you have to have there's certain levels of proofs in order to prove that that your ancestry goes back to the American Revolution, and there's different levels of proof. Some levels
Yeah,
are, first level is like the most credible or the most valid, and then there's, I wouldn't say credible, I would say valid, and then there's like second level proofs and third level proofs of your lineage to someone who but I have a family Bible, it's all in there. So it's
yeah,
kind of like the documents, but it's interesting. Let's hear what he has to
yeah.
say.
My ancestor Samuel Shrout fought in the Revolutionary War,
Mhm.
and the reason I know that is because they gave him a land grant in Pennsylvania for his service.
Hmm.
Anyway, let's not get into DAR.
Okay.
I don't get that excited about DAR to be perfectly
Well, no,
honest.
but it just goes to show that, it's just part of the history, that's all.
Yeah, yeah. I got nothing against it. I'm just saying I
Uh-huh.
don't get particularly excited. Anyway, so this starts out with at Fort Morgan, Mobile Bay, Alabama. There's a commemorative marker erected by the Virginia Cavalier chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution in 1953, which reads, "In memory of Prince Madoc, a Welsh explorer who landed on the shores of Mobile Bay in 1170 and left behind with the Indians the Welsh language."
Hmm.
Now, what you'll find reading through this,
Hmm.
what you'll find reading through this is that these people basically did not intermix
Hmm.
with the other people who were there, and they preserved their language. That they were very careful to preserve their language, and so that's one of the ways it was that they were able to trace them was because of their language. Because like I say, when people came from Europe and everything like that, the Welsh came with them, and the Welsh had a different language than the English and all those kind of things. And so from time to time, some of these indigenous, white, red-headed native people would show up speaking Welsh, and they could understand them. I mean, their language had remained intact to the point that even 5 or 6 centuries later, the people from Wales could actually talk to them and understand them, and they understood them. So anyway, it's just an interesting thing. Then again, because Carrie, has that full Mormon history and everything, he goes into a lot of Book of Mormon stuff here.
Okay.
So I'll exclude that. More anyway, talking about some of the history of the Book of Mormon history. So anyway, it says more than 4,000 years later, in 1170 A.D., Madoc made a similar voyage to the Promised Land. Pre-Columbian voyages to the New World are frequently met with skepticism. Again, they're trying to control the history. The modern historians, like I never heard of this stuff in high school or college, because the modern historians are trying to control the narrative. Anyway, so pre-Columbian voyages to the New World are frequently met with skepticism. Nevertheless, as far back as 800 BC, this Hanno was reputed to have sailed around the west coast of Africa, 30 days westward to the Pillars of Hercules, blah, 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 and suggested that Hanno may have discovered a new land. It should be remembered that Pharaoh Necho II, remember we talked about Necho II, in whom we have expressed particular interest, sent out sailing expeditions around 600 BC, one of which was reputed to have reached the coast of South America. This is 600 BC. And in 400 BC, Plato recounted Hanno's story and added the account of the lost world of Atlantis, referring to an island in the mouth of the sea in the passage of those straits called the Pillars of Hercules, larger than Libya and Asia, from which there was an easy passage over to other islands, and from those islands to that continent, which is out of the region. And then he talks about Poseidon and all those kind of things. Anyway, we have the records. We have the records of people coming to the Americas as far back as 800 BC. So the historians who are trying to promote the European agenda
mm,
are avoiding a lot of this history.
mm,
Again, it's because they're trying to make the claim. See, there was a hot contention between the English and the Spanish about land claims in the New World. And so they had to rewrite history. They had to change this. They had to change that in order to make those kind of crazy claims. Then it goes on and says, talking about some of the Irish, it says also been shown that on at least 5 occasions between 983 AD and 1030 AD, the Norsemen visited the New World, establishing several temporary colonies. The Vikings further frankly admitted that the Irish had been there before them. So this idea that, about all this history and everything had really been perverted. Okay, so it says among the nations which have claimed the honor of being the first to discover America are Arabs, Basques, Catalans, Dutch, Phoenicians, Polynesians, French, Germans, Hindu, Chinese, Japanese, Portuguese, Romans, Turk, and the Welsh. And the latter race make their claims to Madoc ab Owen Gwynedd, who discovered America in 1170 AD, 322 years before Columbus. So we're getting into the story now about Madoc, as one of the Europeans, that had come to North America and had stayed, establishing colonies. And technically, as you'll see if we go through some of the history of these native people, they actually spread all over North America. Through several of the anyway, we'll get into that. Okay, so we're going to get back into some of the history of Wales. So this one particular individual called Owain had several sons. Adding that Madoc was one of those by diverse women. Apparently, Owain was spreading his seed far and wide. Put it that way. Mm-hmm. He further describes Madoc, the illegitimate son, as being loved by many, but carried nothing for power, who left the land in contention between his brethren and prepared certain ships with men and munitions and sought adventures by seas sailing west. The earliest Welshmen were dark and short of stature. But around 1200 BC, they were conquered by a tall, fair race from the continent known as the Celts. The Romans conquered Wales under whoever these guys are. In the 5th century AD, the Welsh were engaged in constant warfare against the Irish pirates, and later they were engaged against the marauding Danes. Not until the advent of this Roderick the Great in 844 AD did Wales come into its own. Anyway, under this Howell the Good, a system of laws and customs were adopted, which gave the Welsh stability. After 1066, Wales found itself engaged against the Norman barons, who were often allied with the English sovereign. Now, recall, we had gone back, some time ago. I can't remember some of the interviews that have been lost off of the internet for the time being. We had talked about, at the crucifixion, that the Pendragon in Wales was so enraged by what had happened, he was raising an army and he was fixing to invade Jerusalem. And the only thing that stopped him from it was the Druid said, no, this is what it should be. This is how it should be. Because you recall, we had told the story of the genealogy of Jesus, that Mary was actually from Britain. She was well known there, and her parents was Anna, and I think his name is Joachim or something like that. But anyway, Mary was from the British Isles, and she came to Jerusalem, and was put in the temple and raised in the temple there in preparation for the birth of Jesus. Now, a couple of times ago, we had talked about the history of Mary. You know, all the way from Maldeck all the way down to our present. You know,
Right.
so we're tying together a little bit of history here. Uh, but you know, people don't realize the interaction of some of these historical situations and the implications and results of it. You know, we're dealing with right now.
Well, it's all by design, sadly.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
There's more to it than what we ever figured.
Right.
Anyway, now we're talking about this King Owain. Uh, so anyway, it says here the Welsh, deeply rooted in Celtic magic and mythology, resisted the English attempts to convert them to Roman Catholicism.
Mm.
They weren't buying it,
Right.
and so that caused a little bit of a problem, as you can well imagine.
Right.
Because I think this Owain was cut off or excommunicated by whoever the guy was there in Canterbury. Oh, actually, it was, let's see, Thomas Becket. Thomas Becket apparently had excommunicated Owain as being a miscreant.
Hmm.
Anyway, they got into a whole bunch of fighting and carrying on. All these children that Owain had sired,
Mm.
uh, when he died, then they got into a fight who's going to be running the things, and I think this Madoc got sick of all that and says, heck with it, I'm leaving.
Hmm.
So anyway, Owain's defiance of the church's ban resulted in his excommunicated by Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury. And according to this one author here, it says Madoc was the outcast son of Owain and commanded by his father to be slain at birth. Breckfast's version states that he was smuggled away from the court through the connivance of his mother and the appointed executioner.
Mm.
He also wrote Madoc alive in truth, but slain in name, a name that could be whispered on the waves, but never uttered on the land.
Mm.
So he apparently was secreted away and raised in a different family. And we have this story going on all the time. Well, Francis
Right.
Bacon, we talked about him, and all this.
Right.
So this seems to pop up quite a bit. Some of these main characters, that come on the planet, under situations, they simply have to hide them, so they can continue to fulfill their mission. It's like taking somebody like me and sticking him in a hillbilly family.
All unassuming for a reason. Low
Oh,
profile, Winston, low profile.
anyway, says the formative years of Madoc are unknown, except that he was allegedly this anyway, child of a foster family, a theme which we were by now quite familiar. At the age of 16, Madoc returned to the court of his father disguised as the wandering minstrel in order to see his mother again. Owain surprised Madoc, being embraced by his mother, and not knowing that his son still lived, assumed the pair to be lovers. Once
Uh-oh.
more, Madoc was forced to flee into exile.
Oh, gee.
He just went home to see mom and trying to, get back to his roots and stuff like that. Anyway, all kinds of crazy things happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds.
Now, getting back to it says at this time, Madoc appears to have been living on Lundy Island in the Bristol Channel, some 15 miles off the coast of Devon. This tiny kingdom had managed for more than 1,000 years to retain its complete independence from the mainland. So he was hanging out. Apparently he was well known and made these kind of alliances and so forth. Okay, so this Sir John Wynne, in his history, clearly lists Madoc as one of 12 natural sons by various women.
Mhm.
And then it be noticed in the this other manuscript identifying Madoc as an explorer of unknown lands is dated 15 years prior to the voyage of Columbus. In other words, this manuscript by this Cottonian, and some of these names. Anyway,
Cottonian, maybe?
yeah. Well, anyway, the manuscript itself identifying Madoc as an explorer
Mm.
is dated 15 years prior to the voyage of Columbus. Now we get into this more
Mhm.
a little bit later here because apparently Columbus knew very well about Madoc.
Oh.
It even had some of the maps and stuff that may have resulted, from some of the exploration done with this Madoc, some 3 centuries prior to that. Anyway, the Welsh manuscripts in the Cotton collection relate that so-and-so Conan died in 1137, was on the maternal side descended from the Scandinavian kings of Dublin, Ireland.
Hmm.
So these Irish keep popping up all over the place.
Right.
Anyway, this other fellow of the Royal Society of Northern Antiquities in Copenhagen, an authority on the Gwynedd ancestry, wrote, "It also deserves mention that Madoc, supposed to have visited America at the close of the 12th century, was a grandson of this same King Griffin, and that he is likely to be acquainted with the Scandinavian accounts of Vinland and other Western countries, this being known to the Scandinavians who were living in Ireland."
Hmm.
So this whole business here, I mean, we're talking about some of this history. It's kind of fun to know this history. I mean, I get a big kick out of it.
Yeah, no, you can see why it takes it takes
Yeah,
several weeks to go through 7 pages.
yeah, I know.
I can't understand that. You have
All
to
right.
get your mind around all the connections.
Well, yeah, to
Yeah.
me, history is ever so much fun. I mean, I just get the biggest kick out of studying all the history and everything.
Hmm.
Anyway, and you'll notice that in all of our previous interviews and stuff, when I'm trying to create models and things like that,
Hmm.
I just have to bring in the history, because if you don't know where you
Absolutely.
came from,
Right.
you have no idea where you're at.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Very
really
true, Winston.
important.
Very true.
Yeah, so I like history. Pretty good fun. Anyway, a detailed account of the feats of Madoc are to be found in this history of Cambria. It's worth recounting in its entirety. So Madoc left the land in contention between his brethren and prepared certain ships with men and munitions, and sought adventures by sea, sailing west, leaving the coast of Ireland so far north that he came to a land unknown, where he saw many strange things.
Hmm.
This land must needs be part of that country of which the Spaniards affirmed themselves to be the first founders since Hanoi's time, for by reason and order of the cosmography, this land to which Madoc came must needs be the same part of Nova Hispania or Florida. Excuse me.
Well, no, I mean, this is all hidden. This is not,
Oh yeah,
I mean, you're going to tell us then what happened and how Columbus ended up getting credit for what
yeah.
somebody else did. Okay, we're waiting for that.
Uh,
Exactly.
actually, Columbus was one of the incarnations of Saint Marie.
Was he?
Uh-huh.
Oh, because I almost would really accuse him of being cabal.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Well, there's a lot of intrigue going on with a lot of that stuff.
Yeah,
Anyway,
very much.
of the voyage. Now, first off, this is written in Old English, and so the words you have to kind of sound them out. Anyway, of the voyage and return of this Madoc, there be many fables famed, as the common people do use in distance of place and length of time, rather than augment than diminish. But sure it is, there he was. And after he had returned home, and declared the pleasant and fruitful countries that he had seen without inhabitants, and upon the contrary part, for what barren and wild ground his brethren and nephews did mercer one another, he prepared a number of ships, and got with him such men and women as were desirous to live in quietness, and taking leave of his friends, took his journey thitherward again. So he went twice. Why are you saying he went twice?
Hmm. Yeah.
At least twice.
Mm.
Therefore, it was to be presupposed that he and his people inhabited part of those countries. For it appeareth by Francis Lopez de Gomorra that in Acuzamil and other places the people honoreth the cross. So he carried Christianity to the New World, apparently. Whereby it may be gathered the Christians have been there before the coming of the Spaniards. But because these people were not many, they followed the manners of the land and used the language found there. This Madoc arriving in the country, into the which he came in the year 1170 AD, left most of his people there, and returning back for more of his own nation, acquaintance, and friends to inhabit the fair and large country, went hither again. So again, this first voyage was they ended up in Mobile Bay. Second voyage that he's talking about here, and there may have been anywhere from 7 to 10 ships that came with him the second time. I mean, I can't remember how many ships they had on the first voyage, but the second voyage, perhaps they had as many as 7 to 10 ships, and they ended up in Yucatan, and they're still there. Interesting.
Yucatan Peninsula we're talking about.
Yeah, Yucatan Peninsula.
Yeah.
You go there and find them.
Yeah.
Well, for what my friend said, they're friendly.
Well, you would be talking about Belize, countries like Belize, and
well, I'm not sure exactly where in Yucatan. I think maybe I can find out, but
well, Belize
it's well known. It's well known. It's not a great mystery, but people don't know where they came from. They can't account for white, blue-eyed, blonde natives. They can't account for it, but we're accounting for it today, which is kind of interesting. It says elsewhere in this narrative, the authors have discussed the discovery of America by Christopher Columbus. We have shown that Columbus himself, a Spanish Jew, was a pirate in the service of Rene de Anjou. Now, this Rene was a part of what? The Priory of Zion that we talked about. You remember the ones who protected the Holy Bloodline?
Right.
And allegedly possessed a map which he utilized to, quote, discover, unquote, the New World. We have shown the connection of Columbus to the Templars and have recounted his quotation of the scripture, also quoted by Joseph Smith and his authority, Isaiah 11:1-5, and it's also reflected in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 113. As we were about to learn that Columbus may have known of Madoc prior to his own voyage of discovery. Ain't it fun?
Yeah, well, it's fun. It's hijacking someone else's discovery.
I put this out in bold language here. It says the Spaniards were perturbed by persistent rumors that they were not the first Europeans to discover America. Boo-hoo, boo-hoo, boo-hoo.
So let's just change history.
Yeah. Anyway, in 1526, talk about the Spaniards now. In 1526, they sent out three expeditions, one to the West Indies on Madoc's trail, and the other two to the Canaries in search of St. Brandon's legendary Island of the Blessed. Letters exchanged between Luis de Rojas, governor of Florida, and the King of Spain between 1624 and 1627 attest to the fact that expeditions had been made in quest of the gente blanca, or the white people, that these people were reputedly of British origin, and that the searches were made in those areas which report of Madoc's landings had come, namely Mexico, Florida, Alabama, and Georgia, or what we call those places today.
Right.
Anyway, in 1670, Spain. See, now again, we're talking about claim of land.
Right.
These Europeans, again, at the end, going back to 1215, 1213 with King John in the Vatican. They're all, the Vatican's trying to claim the planet. So everywhere the cross went, they would try to claim that land. For the Vatican. It didn't work out too well, but anyway, that's what they were trying to do.
Right.
Anyway, in 1670 AD, Spain made a treaty with England, which recognized that possession and settlement were proof of title. The Spaniards made no further quest in search of the white people, the white native people. So you see the politics involved in this.
Yep. Possession.
Yeah.
and settlement.
Crazy stuff.
Proof of title.
Yeah. Now this
Interesting.
Madoc, this next chapter here deals with Madoc, a man of the sea. Let's see what I have here. Like I say, if you look at all this stuff, you know, Carrie just absolutely wears you out.
I know. I'm
names,
like,
names and dates. So you have to kind of skip through a lot of that stuff to get to some of the points. Let's see what I have here. All right. 1170 AD, he left his country, and after a long sail and no less patience, blessed with some happy winds, at last discovered land in the Gulf of Mexico, not far from Florida. So again, what Kerry's doing here, he's going through all these different researchers, and he's showing the evidence that they had found
mm-hmm.
in regards to this Madoc and some of the things that he did.
What were they talking about? Cuba there? Is
No,
that Cuba?
uh,
Not far from Florida.
well, Gulf of Mexico. I mean,
Land
that's
in the Gulf of Mexico, which would be
yeah. It says not far from Florida. That would be Alabama. What we call Alabama today.
okay. Well, it said in the Gulf of Mexico, so whatever. I figured it was an
Not
island.
far from Florida.
Got it. But I'm
Talks
sure
about
they landed there too, though. I mean, they had to have come to Cuba
well, they
first.
spread all over. I don't know if they went to
Yeah.
Cuba or not. It doesn't say
Some
anything
people
about
think,
Cuba. It
or the
doesn't say anything
Dominican
about
Republic.
Cuba.
Yeah. Then
Maybe they
and
did. Maybe they did. I don't know.
yeah.
But anyway, talking about what Madoc done says there, he planted, fortified some advantageous places, left 120 men to finish what he had begun, and returned home after some bad winds. So again, let's talk about the first time he came in 1170. He went back to Wales and brought another expedition, probably 10 years later. So probably the second expedition was in 1180 AD, although nobody really comments on that I've seen so far. Anyway, when he came back, he attempted it with 7 good ships loaded with all necessary provisions, a matter of the confidence required. At his arrival back, he found many of his people, the Britons, dead, caused by the natives' villainy. So apparently they got into a fight. And as we go a little bit further, some of the other evidence, that has been discovered by the archaeologists was that in Mobile Bay, there's actually a fortification that they had established for protection. But apparently they were set upon by some of the other native people who didn't like being there. And so when Madoc got back the second time, he found that, a lot of the people had been killed.
Wow.
Anyway, the country had become embroiled in civil war, influenced by disgust. Madoc, who is represented as of a very mild disposition, resolved upon the matchless enterprise of exploring the ocean westwards in search of more tranquil scenes. The event was, according to the various old documents, discovering a new world from which he effected his return to inform his country of his good fortune, the consequence of which was the fitting out of a second expedition. And Madoc, with his brother Rhirid, or whatever his name was, who was the Lord of Clochrin in Ireland, prevailed upon so many to accompany them as to fill 7 ships, and sailing from the Isle of Lundy, they took the eternal leave of Wales. So this is talking about the second trip.
Right.
And he took his brother with him the second time. And how many people went with him? A whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
This one says 7 ships. The other guy said 10, but who knows? Give or take 3 ships. Anyway, the number of ships for the second expedition are reported variously from 7 to 10. Similarly, the number of men mentioned by various accounts range from 120 to 300. That's a pretty good bunch of people.
Yeah.
Okay. Some of the strongest, again, in this book, Carrie goes through a lot of different researchers, and so we're repeating some of the same things as evidence that this information is had by a lot of different researchers. So he says some of the strongest evidence in support of the claim that Madoc reached America stems from reports by later explorers of encounters with relics and Welsh-speaking Indians claiming descent from Madoc and his colony. Hernando de Soto, remember him? We
Yes.
talked about him in school. Anyway, De Soto, in his reports after his voyages to Mexico and Alabama, relates the discovery at Mobile Bay of the remains of an ancient fortifications, which he said could not have been erected by the known natives of that countryside. So there was something different about the fortifications that De Soto found, because it was not common to the other natives that he observed. Says the first mention of the presence of Welsh Indians in America came from Spanish and English explorers, but it was left to the Welsh themselves to gather detailed accounts of such tribes having better knowledge of Welsh customs and language. One of the earliest accounts by a Welshman is contained in a letter written on March 10th, 1686 by this Reverend Morgan Jones, the minister of a New York church. This letter eventually was presented by Dr. Lloyd to this museum in Oxford. In the letter, Morgan Jones describes how in the year 1666, when he was chaplain to Major General Bennett, the governor of Virginia, he was dispatched by a ship to Carolina, landing at Oyster Point. After suffering great hardships, the lack of provisions induced him and his party to travel overland through the wilderness to Virginia. He and his 5 companions were captured by Tuscarora Indians and sentenced to die. Jones, in his frustration, complained aloud in the Welsh tongue, "Have I escaped so many dangers, and must I now be knocked on the head like a dog?" He was presently approached by an Indian who was the war captain, belonging to the sachem of the Doegs, whose origin I find is from the old British, and took me and told me in the British tongue that I should not die, and thereupon went to the emperor and agreed for my ransom. Jones remained with these Indians for 4 months, during which time he preached to them in the Welsh language, and they would confer with me about anything that was difficult therein. He concluded by saying, "This is a brief recital of my travels among the Doeg Indians. They are settled on the Pontiago River, not far from Camp Atros. I am ready to conduct any Welshman or others to that country." So they knew him. They had contact with some of the Welsh Indians. Now, I'll just use the word Indians, and I know it's not politically correct, but that's the words they use in this book. So I hope nobody's offended by that. Because again, our recommendation when we had talked about the events at Walker Lake, when Jesus appeared to all the various tribes, he was trying to get everybody to, stop fighting each other and get along. And we still have some hostile feelings, some karma and stuff left over from years and years ago and stuff. But we have to put that aside. We got to put that aside, and we all got to be friends and try to work this thing out, because there are events coming which necessitates, cooperation and working together and not fighting with each other over some of this trivial crap. I mean, we got to put this aside. We got to put aside the conflict.
Yeah.
Because the native peoples have certain things, and the other peoples who are here have certain things. They would work well together to accomplish the final goal. And so, I'm just philosophizing a little bit about how we should be treating one another. That's my point.
Right.
Then at a date between 1660 and 1675, a Welsh sailor named Stedman from Brecon was shipwrecked in the Atlantic and washed ashore somewhere between Florida and Virginia. He was found by Indians who spoke a language akin to Welsh, and when he replied to them in that language, they expressed astonishment, treated him extremely well, and supplied him with the best things they had. They told Stedman that their ancestors coming from a country named Gwynedd Anyway, Great Britain.
Mhm.
So from Mobile, Alabama, they had spread certainly all the way to the East Coast. Now, eventually, we're going to talk about going up the Missouri
Mhm.
and being a part of, I mean, they had literally spread all over North America. Eventually, we're going to talk about the Mandanes tribes, and I think, even though I don't have any proof of it, it may be that the Modocs, presently in the Pacific Northwest, may have a connection as well. I don't know that, but the Mandanes certainly did. Anyway, many Europeans were surprised to encounter the white Indians in their travels. This father, Charlotte, whatever, a Catholic priest, traveled from Canada to the Mississippi in 1721 to make a study of the history, religion, language, and customs of various Indian tribes. A certain tribe he called the Iowas informed him that the Omans, 3 days' journey from them, had white skin and fair hair, especially the women. We are reminded that Joseph Smith expressed special interest in the Iowas and sent missionaries to them and even commanded them to marry women of that tribe. Joseph Smith was trying to encourage some of the early Mormons to intermix with the Iowas. Moreover, Smith called for a settlement to be made in Iowa, named it Zarahemla, after a city named in the Book of Mormon. But it was with the Mandans that we finally encounter a bona fide tribe of Welsh Indians. In 1735, this French explorer set out on an expedition to the Missouri River to find a strange tribe that he had been told lived in earth-covered lodges. Verendry, a cultured man and a competent observer, eventually encountered the Mandans and remained among the tribe as a guest. In 1738, Verendry gave us the first authentic account of this then almost unknown mysterious tribe of white Indians. Verendry was surprised to discover that in their customs and mode of living, the Mandans differed from every other Indian tribe he had encountered. They had fair skins, and many of them had blonde hair and blue eyes. They lived in villages which were laid out in streets and squares and kept scrupulously clean. Lodges were made of a framework of logs covered with earth several feet thick, rounded into shapes like domes with a hole in the roof that allowed smoke to escape. They lived more by cultivating their land than by hunting, and they were raising large crops of beans, corn, fruits, and vegetables. A Mandan chief told Verendry that, I don't know how to say French. I'm just, if anybody knows French, please don't be offended by my feeble attempts. But anyway, a Mandan chief told Verendry that his people used to live far to the south, but had been driven north by their enemies. They were the first human inhabitants to settle in that region, but before the end of that century, the Sioux would invade, killing a great many of them. Verendry, having an appreciation of foods as a Frenchman, greatly complimented the Mandans as being excellent cooks and preparing dishes which would have rival those of a European household. Verendry, fascinated by these people, left behind him 2 men to learn the Mandan language. Verendry himself felt certain the Mandans must have some trace of European ancestry, as one of the tribe wore a cross and spoke the names of Jesus and Mary. His men found a few words not unlike the dialect of Brittany. The Welsh language has affinities with that of Brittany, and certain Welsh words resemble those of the same meaning in French. For instance, he gives this word that means church.
Please.
Yeah. Yeah. The next visitor to the Mandans was another French explorer, Maximilian, a friend of Verendry, who confirmed most of Verendry's findings. Maurice Griffin came to America from Wales as a youth, and in 1764 he had been taken a prisoner in Virginia by the Shawnee Indians. He was well treated by them, and they took him on a hunting expedition to the source of the Missouri River high in the mountains. They came across 3 white men in Indian dress who traveled with them for some days until they came to a village where there were others of the same tribe.
Hold on a second here.
Sorry.
That mute wasn't working, just so you know. I'm not sure why. Your
Yeah.
mute button, yeah. Okay, it's okay.
Well, whatever. I'll
Yeah.
try to take another sip of tea here.
Okay, that's helpful.
Sorry about that. Early in the morning, it takes me a while to clear up everything that gathered up
Settles
while I was
down.
asleep.
Oh yeah.
All
No
right.
problem.
Okay. Well, after proceeding with him 4 or 5 days' journey, they came to the village of these white men, where they found the whole nation of the same color, all having the European complexion.
Interesting.
The council lasted 3 days, and Griffin was present. He had not admitted that he knew their language. It was finally decided that the 6 strangers should be put to death. Can you pause it for a minute?
Yes, certainly. Just 1 second.
Yeah, anyway, so this council apparently lasted for 3 days, and this Griffith was present. He had, not admitted that he knew their language. So it was finally decided that the 6 strangers should be put to death, and Griffith thought the time had arrived for him to speak. He addressed the council in the Welsh language, said they had not been sent by any warlike nation, and they were actuated by curiosity and had no hostile intentions, that they merely wished to trace the Missouri to its source, and they would return to their country satisfied with the discovery they had made without any wish to disturb the repose of their new acquaintances. Astonishment glowed in the countenance not only of the council, but of his Shawnee companions, who clearly saw that he was understood. Confidence was given to his declarations. The king advanced and gave him his hand, and from that moment they were treated with the utmost friendship. Griffith and his 5 Shawnee companions remained with the nation for 8 months. As to the history of these people, Griffith could learn nothing satisfactory. All they knew was that their ancestors had come up the river from a very distant country. They had intermixed with no other people by marriage, and there was not a dark-skinned man in the nation. See, these Welsh, did not intermix, at least up to that point, with any of the other native people, that they encountered. So another story here, the early New York missionary Charles Beatty was an early investigator of reports of Welsh Indians. In 1755, Beatty, accompanied by a man named Duffield, traveled some 400 miles south of New York, where he met a man named Benjamin Sutton. Sutton had spent much time in his youth among the Indians and stated that when the Choctaw tribe, a considerable distance above New Orleans, he encountered a tribe of white complexion who spoke Welsh. He heard one of the Indians converse in Welsh with the Captain Lewis, who was one of their prisoners. According to Sutton, this Welsh tribe lived on the west bank of the Missouri River, a great distance above New Orleans. So we're getting a lot of this history here.
Right.
He encountered the unusual case of a Welsh seaman named Patrick Watkins, whose story has significant parallels to that of Joseph Smith. In some fashion unknown, Watkins encountered the Mandane tribe and managed to entice 2 of the Mandane women to establish a polygamous colony. This is a funny story.
Yeah, it's funny. It sounds funny.
Probably not for children. I don't think any children watch these interviews either, but it's
I don't think so.
kind of a funny story.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this man has established a polygamous colony on Charles Island in the faraway
Galapagos, yeah.
group To the present day, Pratt's landing on the east side of Charles Island commemorates his colonizing attempt, and he is further remembered in the fascinating account of him preserved in the journal of Captain David Porter of the United States Navy. Watkins described in the frighteningly ferocious and savage man, uncapped and barbarous in his personal habits, with matted red hair and beard, turned his colony into a personal paradise for himself. The two women did all the work, raising potatoes and pumpkins, while he lay in the shade giving orders or in a drunken stupor.
Jeez.
He exchanged these products for rum or cash from passing ships, and often waylaid sailors who were rash enough to come ashore and employed them as slaves in his colony.
Okay. Sorry about that. Can't see me.
Yeah, let's see. Oh, yeah. Anyway.
Well, they managed to keep it quite a secret.
Yeah. Anyway, this colony was an attempt to establish a new Welsh kingdom infused with mandated blood, with himself as king. But Watkins' kingdom crumbled when two of his slaves began carrying on with one of the mandated women. Watkins, in a fit of rage, killed all 5 of his male slaves, and the unfaithful mandated woman. He stole a boat, sailed off in search of a new paradise with the sole surviving woman. He left the following letter for the captain of the English ship from which he had stolen the boats. So this letter is from the last king of the Welsh Indians. Said, "Sir, I have made many applications to captain the vessel to sell me a boat, but I have always been met with refusal. This time I've taken the law into my own hands. I've spent much time endeavoring to establish my kingdom here." What a kingdom, man. He had laid in the shade and got drunk all the time.
Right.
That's a real kingdom, man. Anyway,
Yeah.
I've spent much time endeavoring to establish my kingdom, to create a worthwhile life, intended to found a new nation of Welshmen with the 2 Mandan ladies who, because of their own Welsh ancestry, when their original king landed in America, are the proper material for joining a fellow Welshman in plural matrimony. The only course to take when one has to found a new race. Now, here's a funny point. Said, "I have no complaint against the women. Said they worked hard and were pleasant to have intercourse with, having a very proper regard for the undoubted fact that the act of procreation is something to be prolonged if those indulging are to get the best of it. But," so here comes, he said, "true, they have the same bad habit of all Welsh women, that they talk while copulating. But we speak much of the same language, blah, blah, blah." He's complaining about the women talking.
To the guy whose boat he stole. To the captain whose boat he stole. And by the way, I had to steal your boat because I needed to take them on a honeymoon.
He said, "I could always give the command for silence. Talk on such occasions only waste a man's strength for the real purpose of the night."
Good grief.
This guy's going to write a book on sex education, I guess.
Yeah.
This is something silly.
Protocols of copulation.
I guess.
Do not talk.
Yeah, if you're Welsh, don't be jabbering.
Yeah, don't be jabbering.
It just tires the man out. You really can't.
That man can't multitask. That's right.
That's it. Well, I don't know. I don't think too many young people are going to be watching this. That's okay. Anyway, so he signed the thing, Mandan Watkins king. Anyway, it just kind of
no. You can't go past this, Winston. It was the black-hearted, scurvy English seaman who betrayed my good women. For that reason only, I must start again. Can you imagine what the guy who received this letter must have been thinking? It's hysterical.
He's pretty much a nut.
You're at liberty to take what I leave behind. There are our potatoes and pumpkins, and the hens are good layers.
Well, back to more serious matters.
That's really funny, though. I mean, what a character.
The guy's a nutcase.
Yeah.
He wanted to lay around drunk all the time and have the women do all the work and his slaves and everything. Then he had to complain about them, with their nightlife.
Exactly.
That's you might say that's a bit chauvinistic.
Yeah, definitely a bit of a womanizer there, I would say.
Anyway, now we're getting into some of the dispersal of some of these people in Kentucky,
Mhm.
my home state. Anyway, Reverend Mr. Rankin of Kentucky testified that the Paducahs.
Mhm.
Now, Paducah, is right now it's a city on the river, on the Ohio River down there in western Kentucky. Anyway, this Rankin testified that the Paducah spoke Welsh, and that the Reverend Humphrey Lynn wrote from a Norfolk rectory that from letters I have received from Kentucky, Madoc must have lived in Florida, Georgia, or Carolina. I have authentic record of such people as Welsh Indians called the White Pains or Bearded Indians.
Mhm.
William Owen, in his letter to the Gentleman's Magazine, 1791, within the last 2 years, I received no less than three several accounts perfectly agreeing with one another, proving the existence of an extensive nation of white people speaking the Welsh language, and we find them even noticed in our common maps under the name of the White Paducahs. In consequence of the European colony spreading over the country, for some other causes, they, the Welsh Indians, removed from the country to Kentucky, where evidence traces of them have been lately found, such as ruins of forts, earthenware, etc. It is presumed that as their situation was secluded and not liable to be molested, they left it only in consequence of discovering a more inviting country, and none could be more so than where they finally settled. So they left Kentucky and went someplace else for apparently looking for
Mhm.
a different place.
Mhm.
Now, uh, so this Major Roberts talks about the white Indians living west of the Mississippi. Uh, Several of them, uh, of late, the Western settlers in Kentucky and Tennessee have received frequent accounts of a nation inhabiting a country a great distance up the Missouri, uh, and retaining some ceremonies of Christian worship. And at length, this is universally accepted as a fact. Uh, no less than the signer of the Declaration of Independence became a witness on behalf of the Welsh Indians, Francis Lewis. Uh, he was captured by Montcalm there at the French and Indian Wars. Uh, anyway, so he talks about the Welsh Indian. Daniel Boone, another explorer who, from firsthand experience in Kentucky and Tennessee, testified to the existence of the Welsh Indians. He was especially impressed by a tribe of blue-eyed Indians and thought these might be of the same kith and kin as the Welsh, though I have no means of assessing their language. So good old Daniel Boone run into him, but he couldn't speak Welsh, so he couldn't, definitely say it. And now here's another deal: uh, Lewis and Clark,
Mhm.
the ones that was sent out to explore and go all the way up into Oregon,
Right.
so forth. They made an attempt to locate the Welsh Indians. Uh, so again, back in those times, this was a hot item.
Mhm.
This is really, it really got the interest of a lot of people.
Mhm.
Even Thomas Jefferson sent out a party to try to locate some of these people. Let's see. We don't want to get too far into a lot of this. Well, so again, these are just more and more and more stories about the people's encounter and experience with uh, these Welsh.
But what,
Apparently, it was all over the countryside.
right, but what they didn't go into much detail, and I'm sure the detail is here somewhere, about why they would even call them Indians versus colonists or, European colonists. Why would they, what about them, about their
Well,
civilization?
they were considered to be uncivilized. In other words, they weren't under the rule of the
Okay,
government.
okay.
So
So,
they were natives. They were Indians.
mhm, Okay.
So they had to classify them in some manner so they could have some kind of political consideration for what was going on here.
Okay.
Because again, the claim on the land.
Exactly.
The Europeans came with a feudal system, and they had to set things up in a way that was understandable to them. And then all of a sudden, you got these white Europeans, these Welshmen, running all over the countryside over here. How do you tame them down, or how do you make land claims based upon the Welsh Indians who are running all over the place? But you can see the advantage that would be had by the British elements and so forth in regards to claim of land based upon occupation by these Welshmen. That's what it's all about. I mean, that's what the excitement was that we have. For instance, when you get down to your westward expansion and Louisiana Purchase,
Right.
and then you get even further west than that, because again, they followed these people all the way up the Missouri. And then, technically, when you get into the Pacific Northwest, you have some of the same things. So again, it's all about land. That's what the excitement is about. What land can we claim based upon the Welsh? And it all started with this Madoc in 1170 A.D. So, like I can say, during the 1700s, the 1800s, and all the kind of times, the political element or the whatevers
Right.
were very much concerned about land that had been occupied by European Welshmen. That's what it was all about. Now, that history had been completely obliterated, in our time, because we simply, we've already occupied the land. So why do we need to worry about the Welshmen running all over the place? You see? And so again, this history has been lost until old Boren here, brings it up.
Right, but the land was occupied by, different Indian tribes. So they.
Well, okay, getting back to the concept again of how is it that we're all going to get along together? Because if you trace down the various tribes, as we call them, they came here too from someplace
Exactly.
else.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So how is it we're all going to get along? And so when you get into the Northeast, you have the Algonquin nations and stuff, who I believe personally came from the area around Jerusalem. And then you get into some of the Western Canadians, and certainly the Navajo, who obviously came from Asia, obviously. And then you get into the Cherokee Nation, who I personally believe are from Atlantis. Now, we do have, from time to time, we do have colonies that were put here. For instance, what do they call them? The ones that disappeared. Not the Yaqui, but some of the Southwest Indians that just all of a sudden sprung up, and then all of a sudden they were gone. And then if you get down into South America, then the story gets even deeper.
Right.
You got the Aztecs, you got the Incans, you got the
gone.
Well, no, they're still there, but
Well,
where
right.
did they come from?
Exactly. Well, there's quite a history here, Winston, that we have to. Is there more of that in this book? Does he go into all of that as well?
No.
No. Okay. So.
No, you have to go to a book called 1491, and I've shown that in times past. And maybe I can go. Maybe I can bring that. I don't have it here handy where I can show it.
Okay. We could do
But
another
there was a book called 1491, and he goes into all the histories of all the peoples of North and South America prior to Columbus. Nowhere in that book does he mention the white Welshman. He don't talk about them.
Oh,
Apparently, he didn't know about them. The guy that wrote that book. It's an excellent book. Trust me on that. Excellent book. But again, the author of that book apparently either did not know about the Welsh Indians, or he decided not to include it. I don't know. But old Boren here is trying to make a point on the basis he's trying to discover the origins of Mormonism in the Book of Mormon. And he was a Gnostic. He only deals in facts. So he doesn't bring in faith. He doesn't bring in spiritualism or any of that kind of thing.
Right.
And so I personally disagree with the natural conclusions that one would come to from reading old Boren's book. I personally disagree with it because we'll go a little bit. Let's go a little bit further so I can make my point. Anyway, just more and more stories about some of the things. I'll just briefly talk about it. I mean, they have found major fortifications around Chattanooga and other places in Tennessee. I mean, there was one fortification that covered something like 50 acres. And it was all the fortifications were similar to European type fortifications. In other words, the other native people
Right.
would never do anything like that. And so once the archaeologists discovered these places, then they said, well, this has to be of European origin. The archaeologists determined that.
You mean like brick and stone and things like that? Their masonry and the way they fortified
Yeah.
their.
Yeah. And so again, like I say, this goes on and on. Now, okay, by this time, the reader's probably asking what all this has to do with Joseph Smith and the advent of Mormonism. In fact, and in point of fact, it has everything to do with both, but we beg the reader to indulge the authors in some future further development of the subject before conclusions are made. Madoc was such a key figure to a developing thesis that we felt compelled to explore his colonization of the Americas as completely as possible, at least in pertinent part. If one accepts the basis of the legend of Madoc made 2 voyages to America, it is logical to assume that considering 12th century navigation, he would have landed in 2 different parts of America and thus would have founded 2 colonies, which apparently he did. So again, you go back into some of the dwellings and fortification they found in Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee. Some of the different things. The old stone fort in Tennessee consists of an irregular triangle of rather more than 50 acres formed by. Then you go talk about you're just talking about the indications they have that these fortifications were certainly not from the Aboriginal natives in North America. That's what he's saying, because no archaeological evidence that would point to that. And so he just goes through some of the different things in that respect.
Well, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to have to wrap it up soon because we're hitting our time.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying here. Anyway, so they go on and on talking about, you can get this book. People, I don't know, it don't cost that much. I mean, when I got it, when I bought it, actually I had a hard copy first, and then I bought this right here, which is I got Lisa, Carrie's wife, sent it to me on CD.
Okay. Interesting. It would be interesting to make comparisons like linguistically, because I have some background in linguistics. This would be an interesting study for a linguist to kind of go in there and then do the mapping of the linguistics of the languages, and then you can, know for sure exactly where everybody.
Well, you're going to like this next part then, because they do exactly that.
Oh, here we go.
Windows 10,
Windows 10. No, I don't have anything nice to say about that.
Just like
sorry, Winston.
Shoot them people. They just drive me crazy with stuff.
We've all had that experience, Winston. We feel for you.
You can't touch the computer in place. Don't do something weird.
I know.
Okay.
It's
here we go. You want to talk about linguistics?
Welsh.
They have a big section on that. There's another section here.
Welsh Indian.
If you want to do linguistics, they got that there.
Okay, me.
See?
Yeah.
Now, I mean, that's something you would understand. I don't know anything about linguistics. Like I say, I barely get by, in hillbilly English, so
Right.
that's about
Well,
as far as I can get with it.
what happens is colonizers tend to come in and they create, like, the children tend to create like pigeon languages, so
Yeah,
which is like a combination of the two. And so you find, I mean, any linguist, anyone who's trained in linguistics can trace that. They can find,
yeah,
even if it doesn't look identical, they'll find the origins. They'll find, the linguists will find that there's, um, you know, uh, all kinds of, not just dialect. It could just be dialect too, but it could be like, you don't know if they're doing this phonologically or if they're doing this with the written language. You presume that they are doing it with the written language, but they will create pidgin languages and also other types of um,
yeah.
variations of the language. Yeah.
Okay, now we're getting into some of the things we talked about in the past because Carrie had been allowed by the Rosicrucians to see some of those documents they had that had come from Benjamin Franklin to Joseph Smith through Isaac Morley, and so these people allowed Carrie to see some of these
Hmm.
documents, books, and all those kind of things.
Interesting.
And so the Rosicrucian documents maintained that Dr. John Dee and not Joseph Smith was the true author of the Book of Mormon.
Mm,
And
interesting.
I personally don't believe that for 2 seconds.
Okay.
But
Okay.
anyway, again, he's just making a case for. Uh, so you remember John Dee? Remember back with Francis Bacon, and John Dee was the original 007 for Queen Elizabeth. He was an alchemist. He created the Philosopher's Stone or the Elixir of Life. Remember that story we talked about
Yes,
that?
Philosopher's Stone.
Okay.
Exactly. Hmm.
So apparently John Dee certainly knew about Madoc, and he had written a book called The Secret Book of Madoc, uh, which somebody is claiming was the original source of the Book of Mormon, which I don't believe for 2 seconds. But in any event, uh, anyway, talks a little bit about the history of John Dee, and we've talked about this. But Dee himself, a collector of ancient genealogies,
Mm.
drew up a genealogical table in which he claimed to be Roderick, Prince of Wales, implying thereby that he was the descendant of the House of Gwynedd and possibly of Madoc himself. So you see all these interconnections that are going on with all this stuff. They're fascinating. And you can draw your own conclusions, like I have, and like Kerry drew his own conclusions, and I drew my own conclusions too. And we're not on the same page with that. It says that Dee was undoubtedly the strongest Tudor Elizabethan protagonist of the Madoc claim to the discovery of America, and the claim to possess manuscript written by Madoc himself and some of his descendants, which proves the claim, which Dee vowed as being compiled from ancient sources into a book.
Mm.
But this book that Dee compiled and so forth was destroyed. And so we don't really know what was in it. So, I'm not going to reach any conclusions, about the secret book of Madoc and the Book of Mormon. It does not compute in my brain. And it's the information I have. Anyway, different points of view that people could look at.
Okay.
So again, I don't know how much this we want to look at. Like I say, we're kind of running for time and everything.
Right.
Yeah, but there is quite a history here. I mean, like I say, and people of those eras were very much concerned with this Madoc and all the things that he had done.
Mm.
Again, we're bringing right back in this Robert Flood and all kinds of different things. See, it all meshes together. All these histories we've talked about,
Right.
they all
Right.
mesh together. But you can't go to college and learn this stuff. It ain't there.
No, but it's very tempting to go when you scroll through this, and there's so many things that jump out at you, and you really just want to
Oh
sit there
yeah,
and read it. You have to get the book. That's the only thing we can recommend, is you get the
yeah.
book,
And then
because
he even makes a connection through all these stories with King Arthur and the Arthurian legends.
yeah.
That there have been a long
Charlemagne.
tradition linking the Arthurian legends with those of Madoc. But like I say,
Yep. Charlemagne and all the characters. It's
well, I don't know
definitely
about Charlemagne.
Yeah, I think I noticed it in there, but it's very interesting. I think to put all the pieces together, but at least, like you said, there's some, maybe anecdotal um, information in here too. So,
Yeah, like I say, this
or
is
parallels. Yeah.
I mean, going on, like I say, we can go on and on with it, so I'll cut it off so we don't, run up on time and everything. But I just wanted to, uh, show all those things, and so if you want to study it, and get some good ideas about it and everything. I think I sent a copy of this to Cosmic Ray.
Oh, yes, he's been a guest on the Goldfish Report.
Yeah, yeah. Ray, he is actually associated with what we would call the reorganized LDS Church, and Ray's a historical scholar, so I wanted him to be aware
Hmm.
of this other information, that Carrie O'Born had put out and everything like that. And I haven't heard back from him since I sent it to him,
No?
but it'd be interesting to see what Ray's impression is about some of these things. Uh,
Right.
and Annalise Guerin and all that story there. I mean, some of that stuff, I buy into, and some of it I don't.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's just interesting historically to try to put the pieces together because it does have an impact and influence on what decisions we make today.
Well, if we're relying, on only our academic, exposures and not our own personal investigations of history, we're not going to get very far. So we're, like you
Yeah,
said, you really need to, go into these more obscure, sources of, but there's reliability in much of it as well. So
yeah. I didn't learn nothing until I got out of college. I mean, the only thing I come away from college with, well, I learned how to train chickens.
yeah, you
All
sure did.
all
That's,
the good that did me, I don't know, uh, but ever since, like I say, people need to spend time doing independent study, of the different things, and so that's what I've tried to do over the last, certainly few interviews and stuff, is bring things to people's attention, things that I've looked at, things I've studied over the time that help me to reach the conclusions that I have reached.
right.
And because again, I'm just like what was it, Benjamin Johnson said, that he could no more remember the books he had read than the meals he had eaten. He said, but they have made me what I am. And
Right.
so people listen to me jabber about commerce, about this, that, and the other, and they say, well, Winston, how'd you come to all that? Well,
Right.
well, I'm just like Ben Johnson.
Yeah.
I can know, I mean, all the things that I've studied, all the things that I've read have contributed to my point of view.
Right.
Now, you may agree with my point of view or you may not. That's up to you. I'm just trying to expose myself in a
Right.
way that might stimulate other people to take a look at
Yeah.
some different things. That's all I've done.
Yeah. Oh, it's very true, Winston. I mean, you're greater than the sum of the parts of the information that,
Well, that's
your
true.
whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So, I mean, it's like, it's very hard. I find the same thing sometimes when people ask me questions on a topic that I have in-depth knowledge on. And it's like, I just can't even start to answer that question because you
Yeah.
just, when you think of all the different things that you have to pull together, to come up with where you arrived, it's hard, but it's a journey everybody, should it's an individual journey everybody should take. But in terms of you training chickens,
Yeah, I can train chickens.
you sure can. Winston made a Skinner box in college, and he trained chickens in a Skinner box, and it's
Taught
pretty
that chicken how to dance to Turkey in the Straw.
cool. Yeah, did you use a harmonica?
Yeah.
It's the best, one of my favorite Winston stories, I have to tell you, because I can appreciate it. I can appreciate it on another level. So,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. So that's wonderful, Winston. This is so exciting, and actually, so people can Google this and get it. And we don't know if he's still around, or like where he is. This the
I could
author.
probably find him if I needed to.
Yeah,
He had intended to eventually end up in Europe. I think he was going to go to the south of France, around Marseille with the cave of Magdalene and all that.
right,
I think that was what his final object was, if he could get free of the leaf
right.
system here. I think that's what he wanted to do. So I don't know if he did or not. He was a few years older than myself,
Mm.
so he might be getting up there pretty good. But let me just say too, in respect to the information I presented,
Mm-hmm.
again, going back to these Yucatan Welsh, uh, because I believe that they're the ones who will actually supply the stonework to build the temple complex at New Jerusalem. I believe that if you fly over Yucatan, over the jungle areas,
Mm-hmm.
you can't see it because it's all covered with vines and everything.
Right.
But I think that they have temples
Mm-hmm.
there that have been covered over, and all they have to do is remove the coverage, load the stones up, and haul them up the Mississippi to actually create, the New Jerusalem. Now, again, for Bible readers in Isaiah, where it talks about the return of the lost 10 tribes, I mean, fit this whole story together because it talks about that when they would come back from the north, and that God would cast up a highway from the great deep, and that the ice would flow down at their presence, which obviously means they're coming out of the northern opening, coming down through the ice and everything. So where are the 10 tribes, lost 10 tribes at? They're inside the hollow earth. And so when you start to get all these weird theories, the people talk about, the hollow earth and this, that, and the other, do all these things correlate? And they do, at least in my mind. I guess I'm
Right.
crazy, but I mean, when I see all these different indications, from all these different directions, and you come across this book about the Welsh Indians living down in Yucatan and everything, to me,
Right.
I'm starting to assemble a storyline that accounts for all these different things. You see, remember I've told how as a student, when I would come upon something that was reasonable and vibrated in my heart,
Mm-hmm.
if I couldn't fit it in anywhere, I would simply put it on a shelf. And then as I was building my model, eventually I would find a place to insert that to build a more perfect model. And so all these weird things that I talk about in my mind, it's a part of a large model, and I have fit all of these pieces into that model to my satisfaction. And so that's what I'm trying to share.
Got it.
You don't have to believe things like I believe it. Not,
Right.
and I hope you don't, unless you can draw the same conclusions from the information that you have assembled into a workable model for you. But for one thing for sure, you know, education, knowledge creates understanding. How are we going to get along with everybody here in this country? And in this, for instance, like what happened in Standing Rock and all the history we have. Why in the hell can't we get along with each other? And I'll have to say that the native population are as poorly educated on these matters as the crazy white people are. Now, how in the world are we going to get to a union? How in the world are we going to get to some kind of harmony unless we got somebody like Porcupine getting after everybody and say, look, guys, we got to figure out how to make this thing work. Because we'll be forever and a day, trying to get it fixed as long as we're fighting with each other.
Right.
And so, like I say, I've had, quite a bit of interaction with what would be called the native population, different places, different times, and everything. And, I seem to get along pretty good with everybody. Seem to.
Well,
But the reason I do is because I understand. I understand the history of all these things. And so it makes sense to me,
right.
how things ought to be.
Well, they are, Q talks about this all the time, talking about, present time, relating this to present time situations. Q
Uh-huh.
talks about this all the time about how the deep state wants to divide us. And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is their goal. As long as we are divided and fight amongst each other, just think about it. They're absolutely playing us like a piano. and we're falling for it. We're all falling for it, which is the sad thing, is that nobody stops and listens to what's in their heart. And you know, Winston, that's why all you have to do is go with what's in your heart. That's the only thing we can do, as long as everybody has what they need, not, you know, 10 times more than they need, because everybody needs to have basic, you know, needs and provisions.
Yeah.
That, you know, should be a right that every human being on this planet has. But whether
Yeah.
you should have 100 times more than you need, you know, that's the problem, when people want more than they deserve and they ought to have, and or at
Yeah.
least more than, or they want it at the expense of somebody else and they're not willing to do it for themselves. This is where you have greed, selfishness, but people who really, you know, go with goodness in their heart, you know, they are people who just want to take care of their families and want what their basic needs are, you know, met.
Yeah.
And that's how we have to do it, Winston. We can't move forward. We're not going to solve the problems of the past either. We can't re-argue and re-fight wars that were won and lost. That's not going to solve the problem either. That's not going to help us get along now. The only thing we can really do is make a decision to move forward new from this point on. Start a new kind of, you know, reconciliation and move forward,
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
the fights are gonna, what the deep state keeps doing and people keep falling for, is they keep reinvigorating, they keep reigniting, I should say, old wounds and old wars and old arguments. And every, you know, people who, um, you know, uh, I don't know why they do it. I don't know why people really fall for it, because I don't fall for it. I can remember when this whole movement started like 2 years ago. I was like, there's peace here. What do you mean there's riots all of a sudden? What do you mean there's this racism? There was none. Like, they just started engineering this. They started infiltrating
Yeah,
society.
they did. They
and
did
and I,
engineer it.
you know, and I think most people realize it, which is why some people don't believe that there really is this agenda to divide us, because they don't see it themselves, you know. But there's people who are more susceptible to these things, who are maybe more, for whatever reason that they may be, and they fall into what the group think is. They fall into what, you know, the their peers are doing, whether and they don't stop to think for themselves whether this is the right thing to do. But you're right, Winston, we have to just kind of come to some kind of, you know, reconciliation, at least agreement, and move forward. And I don't know how else we're going to have peace on this planet if we don't.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do also with karma that has not been removed from
Mm,
past lives. One of the drawbacks, you know, in my opinion,
mm,
that I've seen, it appears that the native population reincarnate back into the
uh-huh,
native population,
oh,
and so they don't remove that karma from, you know, the Trail of Tears or from whatever.
right,
They keep it, and they have not forgiven, and they have not forgiven themselves. And so when they keep reincarnating back into
mm,
the native population and stuff, you know, they perpetuate, and that's probably not a good idea. Now, some of them perhaps, you know, would want to do that. For instance, the Lakota. So you mentioned Tolek earlier about the
right,
Lakota, so forth, and they're Andromedans, but not all the native people are Andromedans. For instance, you know, when I was dealing with the Maori down in New Zealand, they're Pleiadian, and but so again, you know, I can see why they would want to reintegrate through reincarnation into the same nation and so forth, but that has its drawback, and that is that, you know, they keep carrying and fostering the same karma,
right,
and they never forgive, and they never forgive themselves. And so that is a drawback to reincarnating back into the same population that you have previously
right,
suffered all these things with. And so yeah, there's going to have to be a lot of work done, a lot of,
right,
you know, spiritual work, a lot of clearing, a lot of cleansing, and so forth, in
right.
order to get past these things.
On an
And
individual
so,
level,
you
though,
know,
right?
yeah, but also on a national level, uh, because again, a part of the DNA for of a lot of the native peoples of North America in particular is that they always have rely upon the concept of the chief. And so, if you can convince the chief of something, then the whole group go along with it. If the chief goes this way, they go that way. If the chief goes the other way, they go that way. And so they're kind of a hive mentality.
Hmm.
And so the individuality, that could be demonstrated and so forth, is retained in the DNA, if I can use that word, and in their genetic history, which may not be to the very best effect.
Hmm.
And so again, independent study by all individuals of whatever race or culture you come from is so very, very important. And because, like I say, I'm dealing with some of the folks down on the res, and many of the young people down in the Navajo nations down there have gone out into the collegiate world, and they've gotten good educations. They've at least what's offered in that crazy world,
Right.
but they have come back. They have come back, and those are the ones that I'm working with because they're at least semi-progressive to the extent that they want to see improvements. They don't want to keep fostering the same old karma.
Right.
And it's going to be a little bit hard to get past, some of the karma that seems to be the prevalent thought process and so forth. But it can be done. But what I'm encouraging all people of whatever race or culture or whatever, even the Cajuns. Hey, I love Zydeco music. But anyway, everybody should be making an attempt for a broader understanding, a broader education. Now, haven't I done this in these interviews?
Absolutely.
Haven't I given a broad perspective?
You doing some mind control there, Winston? You're running
Yeah,
your.
I'll do some mind control. How about that right there?
Oh boy.
But anyway, we're just trying to promote, through the GoldFish reports, country road reports, and stuff. A broad spectrum of information to encourage people to go and get outside your bubble and go
Goldfish
see what else there is out there.
bowl. Outside the
Now what?
goldfish bowl. No, outside the
Yeah,
goldfish
get outside the
bowl. Get
goldfish bowl
outside
and see
that
what.
goldfish
Yeah,
bowl.
see what else there is out there.
Goldfishies. Yeah, we got to get outside the goldfish bowl, folks.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, Winston, thank you so much. This has been very enlightening, as always. Thank you very much. And I think this is going to get a lot of people very excited to get this book and to get moving. And I do have some people who were still looking for the last book. We were talking about the last
Uh,
program that we had with
with Joey.
Joey. Yes. And
Yeah,
so I
good.
thought we had the link there, but I'll double check and make sure we put that link
Yeah,
in.
we did. We had a website and everything.
Yeah, so I think we got that all that going good. I know our internet's not been that great, folks, but we are you know, we've had a lot of unfortunate, I would say, you know,
Setbacks.
setbacks, yeah. And so it's hopefully it won't be long, but they're setbacks. And so Goldfish Report is, by the way, since we're closing up here, I wanted to screen share and I wanted to remind our viewers that we're not going anywhere. We might not have the best internet, but this is, of course, our news page, our 24/7 news page, and you have to be on Facebook to access it. Actually, you don't have to be on Facebook, but you have to go to Facebook because this is a completely public site. And of course, this is all of the current news that's not censored by the mainstream media. So you can find this on the Goldfish Report. You can also go to um, our Patreon page. You could find us on Patreon. Please become a member and help support this viewer supported uh, research media, because it is here for you and for your benefit. And also, of course, we have our BitChute channel, which is right here, which is where you can find all of our own reports on our. This is a new channel on BitChute, and we also have. We do have the a new Goldfish Report YouTube channel, but there's we have issues with it. So, you can go here. You certainly can find all of the country roads, Goldfish Report country roads. The POTUS reports, though, you have to go to Facebook to get the link. Okay, it's published on Facebook. Go to our Facebook group, the Goldfish Report group. And I will start publishing these on the website as well. They will be up on the blog. We are struggling to keep up with all the new platforms now that we have to be publishing on, because we don't have a staff. So there's very few people doing this. And primarily it's usually always myself. So there's a time when, we're out of time. But this is the Goldfish Report, the new YouTube channel. Please subscribe to our channels, and you will get notifications of our new reports. And also subscribe to us on BitChute, because we are building that, and it's going very well. And of course, we certainly would love to have all of our subscribers back, and enjoying our reports and commenting. I mean, we would go through, hundreds of comments from viewers, and it was always wonderful connecting with viewers that way, and we do miss that. So please make your comments and leave your comments and messages there. So I just wanted you to know that we are here, that we still have the new YouTube channel. The POTUS reports, however, you won't see them on this. You have to have the link because they're unlisted. And that's how we're keeping the channel up still at this point. For some reason, the POTUS reports seem to be very controversial. And there's, the powers that be don't particularly like to have the conservative viewpoints that we share and that we share on the internet, and that's why they deleted our channel. But this is working against them. I think these things, Winston, are going to resolve themselves pretty soon. I hope to really have my original channel restored, but in the event that doesn't happen, we're just moving forward, folks, and there will be a separate archive page for all of the previous reports. We couldn't put them on the current channels that we have, because the way they post in order that you upload them, so then all of our current ones would be last. So we will have an archive page alone, and when that happens, I will put the archive link in the description section of the video. And that's it for this week. I hope you all have a really great weekend. And Winston, I hope you have a great weekend.
Yeah, the sun's actually shining here in Oregon, so going to be good.
Yeah, the sun came out here on the East Coast, but it's cold. So let's just be happy for one thing at a time. At least it's sunny, but it's been very cloudy. It's like very strange weather here on the East Coast, not usual at all. So, but we are going to have a nice weekend. We're going to see all of our viewers back on Monday for our next POTUS report. And again, go to the Facebook page and find the link. And also, I will be posting them on our website at www.thegoldfishreport.com, and also on our blog that is not updated, but we hopefully will get that updated this weekend. So all of the FETSA reports should be there as well. But just so our viewers know, we are on several platforms now, and we have to be because of the censorship. So I hope that that will resolve itself soon. And have a great weekend, Winston. I'll see you next week for another episode of Country Roads.
Okay, have a good day.
You too. And this concludes this edition of the Goldfish Report.